Hello there. Let us continue solving questions on iteration statements. And with this video, we will get started with the nested loop patterns. Now, as the name suggests, we're going to solve some questions where we would be printing some patterns with the help of nested loop. And before I get started with the first question from the list, let me give you a glimpse of all the questions that we are going to solve and the fact that we're going to divide all of this into multiple videos instead of cramming all of this in one single video. So the first subcategory that you see is box, where we've got a bunch of questions, which is what we are going to solve today in this video. Then if I scroll further down, you would see another category or subcategory called right angle triangle left aligned, where we have got a bunch of questions. Then if I scroll further down, you would see another category, which is inverted right angle triangle, which is left aligned. And scrolling further down, you would come across triangle, which is center aligned. And then if I scroll further down, you would see a couple more subcategories here as well. Then we will get to symmetry, and at the end, there's a section called the bonus section. Okay, this is not bonus 2, this is a typo. This is a bonus section where we've got a few questions which we will solve at the very end. Now, before I get started with the first question from the subcategory called box, which is what we are going to attempt in this video, there are a few things that I wanted to talk about. So as you can see, there are a lot of questions, right? Now, if you look for pattern related questions online, you'd get a lot more. From all of the questions that are available and from all of the questions that I could think of, I had selected a few. My attempt with this video and further videos where I'll be solving pattern related question is to make you comfortable with nested loop, because nested loop is going to be useful when you start learning DSA. So my attempt is to make you comfortable with nested loop, and that is why I have got a bunch of questions. And if you would notice, you would find that some of them are in a way repeating. When I say repeating, they're not the exact copy of the previous one, but there's slight difference if you notice. For example, here we are printing 1 in the first line, 2 in the second line, and so on, right? Here we are printing A in the first line, which is the first letter of the alphabet. So this is what I mean when I say there are a few questions that are repeating. So back to the main thing that I was talking about, which was the agenda for this video and the next few videos where we would be solving questions with nested loop is to make you comfortable with nested loop. And that is why there are a lot of questions that I would attempt to solve with the sole aim that you get comfortable. And the reason there are slight variations of the question is so that you use the same code and slightly different logic again and again, and that would make you comfortable with nested loop. So with all of that said and done, let's get started with the first question from the list, which is this. Now, before I start discussing how to solve this, let me quickly put this pattern down here. So this is the pattern that we are attempting to solve, right? Now, what is one way in which you can attempt this? What is the simplest way in which you can attempt this? Let's get started from there and then build towards a generic logic which we are going to use. So the simplest way in which you can attempt this is by printing this thing 5 times, right? Because that's what is happening. So if I do this, for example, if I go for System.out.println, and what I do here is I put this, right, within a pair of double quotes. I will be able to print this once. Now, if I just copy this over here, I'm copying it this way, but then in code, you would just go for Control C and Control V. And if you paste it 5 times, let me do that quickly and then continue. Would you be able to solve this? You would be, right? Because the first println statement will take care of the first line. The second println statement would take care of the second line, and so on, right? So we've got 5 println statements which would print this entirely, which is what we are trying to do, correct? So let me quickly write the code for this. Of course, this would have told you that this is not the approach that we are going to take, because what we are trying to do is we're trying to make it generic, but we will get to that shortly. So for that, what am I going to do is open IntelliJ, Then inside the iteration statements package, inside questions, let me create a new package. Let me name this as nested loop patterns. And since we are dealing with the first subcategory, which is box, let me create another package inside nested loop patterns. Now here, what are we going to do is we're going to create a new Java class, and let's keep the name simple. Let's just say Q1, that is question 1. And let's introduce a main method. Now, as we had discussed, what are we supposed to do is we're supposed to print asterisk, and let's keep space, a single space between each one of them 5 times, right? So asterisk with a space here in one println statement, and then we will have to copy this over for 4 more times, right? Now, if I run this code, what will we get? Well, we will get this. And if I go back to the list of questions, that is what we were trying to solve, right? So this is the simplest way in which you can solve this question. But now the question arises is, what if I have to print, say, a box of 6 cross 6 stars? As in, right now, what do we have? We have got 5 stars each, right? As in 5 stars in one line and a total of 5 such lines. But if we needed 6 cross 6, that is 6 stars. I'm saying stars, but then it is called asterisk. So 6 asterisk in one line and then 6 lines in total. What you would have done is you would have changed the println statement to have 6 asterisk, right? And then you would have copied this println statement and you would have pasted it 5 more times, giving you a total of 6 println statements, right? But then the solution is not generic. So what are we going to do next is we're going to figure out how can we make the solution generic. Now, the first thing you would notice is the same println statement getting repeated 5 times. And if we have got a logic or a bunch of statement in Java which is getting repeated a certain number of times, what can we do is we can use a loop, right? So since this is getting repeated 5 times, what we can do is we can put a loop where we will say int I is equal to 1, I less than equal to 5, I plus plus, right? And what we can do is we can get one of these println statement and we can paste it inside the loop. So if I run this, it will produce the same output that these println statements produced, right? Because both of them are doing the same thing. The first solution that we discussed was printing 5 asterisk separated by a space in one line, and that was being done for 5 times, right? We are doing the same thing over here in the loop as well. So let me comment this out for now. We'll delete it later. For now, let's just comment it out and let me run the code. And that is what we have, right? We've got the exact same output that we got in the first solution that we had discussed, right? So because it is giving us the same output, let us delete this. Okay, now coming back to that same discussion we were having as to having 6 asterisks in one line and then having 6 lines in total. What would we do to handle that? Because even now, if we were to print 6 asterisks in one line, what would you do is you would give a space at the end, that is here, put another asterisk and change the value from 5 to 6, and then you would run the code, right? So if we know that this is changing, can we store this in some variable? Can we say the variable's name is n, and can we say int n is equal to 6? And can we replace this 6 with n? We can, right? And if I run the code, it would give us the same output, correct? So far, so good. But there's still another problem. The problem is if I change the value of n from 6 to, let's say, 5 or 7, what would happen is if I change it to 7, you would have to modify this also, right? Because if you don't, you would get the incorrect output. And if I change this to 5, you would have to do the same thing. That is, modify the println statement. But again, what are we trying to do is we are trying to get a generic solution, right? So you would have noticed that if n is equal to 5, we are printing 5 asterisk over here each separated by a space, right? And the loop is also running for 5 times because we have said I less than equal to n, right? So this is able to print this. Now, how can we take care of the println statement that is inside the loop? So if you notice, what's happening in the println statement inside the loop is, and for that, let us come back over here and let's take one of this. What's happening in the println statement inside the loop is asterisk is getting printed, right? I mean, a bunch of asterisk is getting printed. So when n was 5 asterisks were getting printed. If n changes to 6, we would have to print 6 asterisks, right? If n changes to 7 asterisks, right? So can we take this and decompose it this way? Can we say system.out.print and we print only one asterisk, right? And then what we do is, because we want to print it 5 times, we repeat this statement 5 times. And you know how to repeat a certain statement, right? You can use a loop. So if I use a loop to print this, what will we have? Let's see. So we know that the value of n is 5, right? And what are we trying to do is we're trying to print this 5 times. So can we say for int say I is equal to 1, I less than equal to n, I plus plus. We can, right? And we will say system.out.print and we will print an asterisk. We'll also leave a space because the solution we had discussed a couple of minutes ago had spaces between each of the asterisk, right? So leave a space, close the double quotes, give a semicolon and close the curly brace. So what will be the output of this, assuming that n is 5? And keep in mind that this is system.out.print and not println. I'll tell you why in a moment. So because this is system.out.print, what's going to happen is it will print one asterisk and it will leave a space. I mean, it will print a space because we have left a space over here. Then it will print another asterisk. It will do the same thing for 5 times, right? And this would have also told you why are we putting system.out.print over here and not system.out.println. Because if we put println, what's going to happen is it will print one asterisk, then it will go to the next line and print another asterisk over there, which is not what we want. We want all of these asterisks to be printed on the same line, right? So long story short, if we have to handle this, instead of printing asterisk 5 times inside, using the same system.out.println statement, what we can do is we can use a loop to run the system.out.print statement n number of times, right? It will do the same thing. So with this understood, let us go back to IntelliJ and let us modify the code that we have. So what do we have over here is a system.out.println printing 5 asterisks separated by space. On the basis of whatever we have discussed just now, what we will have to do is introduce another loop, right? Now, since this println statement is inside a loop, the other loop that we introduce to replace this should be inside the loop, right? No brainer. So what I'll do is I'll first of all comment this out, then I will introduce another loop. Now in the example that we have discussed, what we did was we took int I is equal to 1. That is, the variable that we took was I. But over here, when we introduce the loop, we cannot take variable I. Why? Because variable I is being used over here. Now here I didn't bother about taking another variable because this is the only loop that I was going to talk about. But because we are implementing it over here, I will have to think about another variable, that is using a different variable name, right? So if I put int I, you would notice that this would give an error which will say variable I is already defined in the scope. So let's change this to int j. Now what are we going to do is we're going to say int j is equal to I, j less than equal to n, and j plus plus. And then on the basis of whatever we have discussed, what do we need is we need a system.out.print, right? So we will put system.out.print, then within a pair of double quotes, we will put an asterisk and a space. Now, before I run this code, let me do this. let me grab this, right? And let me comment all of this out for now. Let me paste the inner loop that I had just put. Let me show you the output of this. So if I run the code, you would get, see, one line printed where we have got asterisk followed by spaces. Sorry, one space separated by spaces, not followed by spaces. So we've got one line with asterisk and then a space, then another asterisk, then another space, and so on. Now, I had mentioned that we need to use print and not println. So let me put println over here just to show you what's going to happen if we use println instead. And this is what will happen. It will print each of the asterisk and then a space in one line. That is, those 5 asterisks would be printed in 5 separate lines instead of being printed in one single line, right? So with this clear, let me change this back to system.out.println. Actually, let me just delete all of this because we have the same code over here. And let me just uncomment this, right? So let's run the code and see what the output is. What we are expecting is this would print asterisk followed by a space, right? For n number of times. And because we are repeating this for another n number of times, it should be able to print a box-like pattern, something like this, right? So let me run the code. I knew this won't work because what are we missing over here is system.out.print asterisk followed by a space is there. But what are we missing is we're missing the statement that would separate these into different lines, right? So let me get to that. Now, once we have printed this, as in once we have printed 5 asterisks given the value of n is 5, what we should be doing is we should be pushing the cursor to the next line. And for pushing the cursor to the next line, what we can do is outside of this for loop. Why outside? Because we want to do that once n number of asterisks has been printed on one line. So outside of this for loop, I'll put an empty println statement. So what is going to happen is given n is equal to 5, it will print this asterisk space this way. So we'll have 5 asterisks, right? Once these 5 asterisks has been printed, the loop will terminate, and what will happen is an empty println statement will be encountered, which will bring the cursor to the next line, right? And then the same thing would continue. So each of these 5 asterisks would be in different lines. So now let me run the code, and this is what we have, which is what we were expecting, right? So this code seems to be working absolutely fine. And because it is working fine, let me just clean it up a little bit to remove everything that we don't need. Now, if I change the value of n from 5 to, let's say, 4, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to get a smaller box, 4 by 4, right? If I change this to, let's say, 7, we will get a bigger box. And that is what we are getting, right? So this question is solved, right? Yes, it is. But before I get to the next one that you see over here, I wanted to talk about something, which is this loop and what will the value of I and j be in this loop. I'll tell you the reason also in a moment, but first of all, let me quickly create a new Java class, and what shall we name it? Well, let's name it as explanation. Not an appropriate class name, I agree, but let's keep it to explanation for now. And what am I going to do here is I'm going to grab the main method from here actually, and I'll replace this with the copied code, and I'll just remove the println statements. Sorry, just this one. I'll remove just this println statement. And what am I going to do next is I'm going to print the values of I and j over here inside the inner for loop. So let me quickly do that. I'll say I colon and then plus I. And then what am I going to do next is I'm going to say comma j, and then I'll print the value of j. Sorry, small j. Now let me run this code. Okay, this is not in a good format for us to be able to understand what's happening. So let me quickly add a pipe over here so that each I comma j pair is separated by a pipe. So if I run this now, yeah, much better. So as you can see, for now, let's just focus on the first line. So as you can see, it is I1, J1, then I1, J2, I1, J3, and so on, all the way up to I1, J7, which means what must be happening is when I is equal to 1, this is running for n number of times, which is 7 in this case. And that is why we are getting j is equal to 1 all the way up to j is equal to 7, right? Similarly, once this is done, of course, the system.out.println would push the cursor to the next line, and then I will be equal to 2. And then this would repeat 7 times again, right? So that is why we are getting 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so on all the way up to 2, 7. So the reason we are getting this as the output is simple. N is equal to 7. We are starting each loop from 1 and going all the way up to n, that is including n, and that holds for the inner loop as well, right? Now the reason I discussed this is because this is not what you would find usually, and what you would rather find is I starting from 0 and going till 1 less than n. That is, instead of I less than equal to n, you would have I less than n, and this would be j is equal to 0 and j less than n. If I run the same code now, what's going to happen is it is going to give us, see, 0, 0, 0, 1 all the way up to 0, 6. So both the loops are still iterating 7 times each, but the start value and the end value, as you can see over here, has changed. It is starting from 0 instead of starting from 1, like what happened in the previous code that we had, and instead of ending at 7, it is ending at 6. So from 1 to 7, there are 7 iterations. From 0 to 6, there are also 7 iterations. Now, the reason I am introducing this is because this nested loop would be very useful when we get to 2D arrays. And when we talk about arrays, we don't start from 1, we start from 0 instead. I'm not getting into the details of why, because I want to reserve that conversation to the time when we discuss that topic. For now, whether you start from 1 or from 0 won't really matter, but I just wanted to let you know that you would mostly find, actually saying mostly would be incorrect, but then you would find variations of the same code where it starts from 0 instead of 1. So when you do, as in when you find the variation, you're not confused. So with that clear, let me come back to Q1. So if I change this to start from 0 instead, like we discussed, how would we change this is, it will be I is equal to 0 and I less than n, right? And similarly, j is equal to 0 and j less than n. And if I run the code, I should get the same output, and that is what is happening, right? If I give a smaller value of n, for example 4, I should get 4 by 4, and that is what we are getting. So this code is also working absolutely fine. So with this clear, let's come back to the list of questions that we have and take a look at the question we have just solved. So you would have realized that printing something which is in box shape, and this box here being a square shaped box, not a rectangle one. So printing something which is in a square shaped box would need iterating for n by n, that is n cross n times, right? So we iterated for n times in the outer loop, and then for each iteration of the outer loop, we iterated for n times in the inner loop. So iterating n cross n times and printing for each of the iteration helped us in printing this pattern, right? So with this clear, let us move on to the next question, which is this. So here, what are we going to do is we're going to print 1 5 times in the first line, 2 5 times in the second line, and so on all the way up to 5 5 times in the fifth line. And of course, this is taking the value of n equal to 5. If the value of n was 6, for example, we would be printing 1 6 times in the first line, 2 6 times in the second line. It would have gone from 1 all the way up to 6 6 times in the last or the sixth line, right? So let us first of all discuss how can we solve this and then write the code. So let me quickly put the pattern over here. So this is what we are trying to print, right? Now we have just discussed that printing something which is in a square shaped box needs iterating n cross n times, right? Over here, n is equal to 5. If I draw a box and then I split it into 5 parts horizontally and 5 parts vertically, and I assume that this is 0, 0, right? And then I continue from there, as in if this is 0, this is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. If I take any one of these cells that you see, if I take this one, for example, it will be 3, 3, right? So the value of I will have to be 3 and the value of j will have to be 3 to be able to access this. Similarly, if I take this one, for example, it would be 2, 4, right? So taking n is equal to 5 and iterating from 0 up to 1 less than n in the outer loop, and then in the inner loop doing the same thing, iterating from 0 to 1 less than n would give us something like this, right? Now, what we did in the last question, which was this, was we printed asterisk in each of them, right? That is why if you take a look at the code that we have, inside the inner loop, we're printing just an asterisk and a space. So if I come back over here and I do that same thing, so I get this asterisk space, right? In all of this, correct? And this would be applicable to all of the rows that we have, right? Now, I'm talking about the last question because I want to relate this to whatever we got as an output. And I'm doing that because we're going to use that same knowledge or the same relation or the same conclusion that we are building right now to solve this. So take a look at what we have over here and take a look at the values of I and j that you would have and try to figure out what would you print in each of these cells. So the first line is all ones, right? Which means you would have to print 1 over here. Then in the second line, you would have to print 2 and so on. And in the last line, you would have to print all 5, right? So to be able to print this, what you should do? Well, you would have two variables, right? You would have I and you would have j. I will iterate from 0 all the way up to 4. J will also iterate from 0 all the way up to 4, right? So if you try to find a pattern over here, you would see that when I is 0, we are printing 1. When I is 1, we are printing 2. When I is 2, we would be printing 3, right? And then when I is 3, we would be printing 4. And lastly, of course, when I is 4, we would be printing 5. So knowing that we need to use an n cross n loop, that is an outer loop that runs for n times and an inner loop that runs for n times, and each of these iterations would involve printing something to be able to get the pattern that we are going to print. Deciding what to print in each of these iterations would be required, right? Now over here, the decision is simple. If the value of I is 0, print 1. That is, whatever is the value of I, print the next number. That is, if I is 0, print I plus 1, which is 1. If I is 1, print I plus 1, which is 2. And this holds for all of these, right? So with this clear, what should we do? We should go to IntelliJ, then we should create a new Java class. We should say Q2 and we should have a main method. And let's grab this one from the explanation class. Let's paste over here and let's of course create a variable, say n. Let's assign 5 to it. Let's get rid of this right now. On the basis of whatever we have discussed, what are we supposed to do is we're supposed to print I plus 1 with a space, right? So we'll say I plus 1 in a pair of parentheses, then we will leave a space and this won't be println, this will be print, right? So if I run the code, what do we get? Well, we get all 1, that is 5 ones in the first line, 5 twos in the second line, and all the way up to 5 fives in the last line. And if I change the value of n from 5 to 6, what do we get? We get this, which is something we wanted, right? If you count the number of ones that we have in the first line, there are 6 ones. The same holds for number of twos in the second line, and the same holds for all of these, right? So with this, we're done with the second question. Now let's move on to the third question, where we're printing A. That is 5A in the first line, 5B in the second line, and so on, all the way up to 5E in the fifth line, which means the value of n is 5, right? So if we come back here, and let me quickly erase this. This is what we will have ultimately, right? I mean, we have this pattern to print, and to print this pattern, because we know that this is a square shaped box, we're going to iterate for n cross n times, which will give us this, right? Now, what we have to do over here is, in the first line, that is when I is equal to 0, we have to print A, correct? Then when I is equal to 1, we have to print B. When I is equal to 2, C, then D, and then lastly E, correct? So that is how we will be able to print this. Now, this is similar to what we have just discussed. Right now, what we did was, as in the last question, what we did was, when I was 0, we printed I plus 1. But over here, when I is 0, we don't have to print the first natural number, which is what we wanted to do in the last question. We have to print the first letter of the English alphabet, right? So first of all, let me tell you how can we relate I with A. So A is the first letter of the English alphabet, right? And we need to print this when I is 0. Then when I is 1, print B. When I is 2, print C. Then when I is, 3, print D. I is 4, print E, right? Now, this is integer. This is character, right? And we know that characters and integers relate, as in integers up to a certain extent can be converted to character, and character, of course, can be converted to integers. How? ASCII, right? So the ASCII code of A is 65, of B is 66, of C 67, then 68, and then 69. So can we do this? When I is equal to 0, can we get 65? We can. Similarly, when I is equal to 1, can we get 66? Of course we can, right? So what we can do is, we can go for 65 plus I, right? So when I is 0, we will get 65 plus 0, which is 65, which is what we want. When I is 1, we will get 66. When I is 2, we will get 67, and so on. So if we do this, and if we print the character that is associated to this ASCII code, we will be able to get A, B, C, D, E, and so on, right? So before I discuss further, let me go to IntelliJ. Let me create a new Java class. Let's name this class as Q3. And over here, let me just show you whatever we have just discussed. So what I said was, we can go for 65 plus say 0, and 65 plus 0 will be 65. And if I convert this to character, we will get the character associated to that ASCII code. Now converting this to character is pretty simple. All we will have to do is, we will have to say char C, right? As in, we need to perform this addition, and we will have to initialize this to a variable which is of char type. Now if I print the value of C, what will we get? Well, we have got A, right? If I change this to 1, I should get capital B. And that is what we got. Changing this to 2 would give us capital C, and so on. Pretty simple, right? So with this, if I come back over here, what are we going to get? Well, what we will have to do over here is, we'll have to iterate for 5 cross 5 times. And then all we will need is add 65 to the current value of I, and then change it to a character, right? With this, we'll be able to solve this question. So let's come back to IntelliJ, and let me quickly grab the code that we have here in Q2. And actually, let's just grab the contents of the main method. So let me paste it over here. Now over here, we don't have to go for I plus 1. We have to go for I plus 65, right? So before I continue, let me get rid of these two statements. Now, if I just go for I plus 65 and I run the code, what we will get is this. We won't get the characters printed. We have to convert them to character, right? So to convert them to character, what we can do is, we can typecast. correct? So if I typecast, this is what we are getting, correct? 6 A's in the first line, 6 B's in the second line, and so on, all the way up to 6F in the sixth line. So this is how we can solve this question. Instead of adding 65 to I and then typecasting to char, what we can do is replace 65 with capital A, which is a character. So if I do that, and because we are performing addition, what's going to happen is, since this is integer and this char will also be converted to an integer. So A will be converted to 65 and it will go for I plus 65, which is what we were originally doing. And then the value over here will be casted to char. And because it will be casted to char, if I run the code, I should get the same output, which is what we are getting, right? So this question is also done. Now, moving on to the next question that we have, which is this. This one is the reverse of this, correct? So over here, what are we doing is we're printing 5 5s in the first line, 5 4s in the second line, and all the way up to 5 1s in the last line. So we're printing from 5 to 1, and earlier we printed from 1 all the way up to 5. So the solution to this also will be as simple as the solution to this or this. So let us discuss that. And for that, let me quickly clear this and then continue the discussion. So this is the pattern that we are trying to print, and this is what we will get when we iterate for n cross n times, right? So like other examples, what we are going to do now is we're going to relate what we have to print in each line with the value of I. So take a look at this. This is I, this is j, right? When I is 0, we have to print 5. So this must have told you, and the previous examples also must have told you, that whatever we are printing here is not related to the value of j. J is just ensuring that it is getting printed n number of times, right? Now, what we have to do next is we have to figure out how to relate I being 0 to the value that is getting printed, which is 5. Similarly, how to relate I being 1 to the value that is getting printed, which is 4. And the same thing for all of the other rows that we have to take care of. So if you take a look, you would notice that when I is 0, you have to print 5. So let me write that down over here. When I is 0, print 5. Then when I is 1, print 4. I is 2, print 3. So let me put these down also. When I is 1, print 4. I2, print 3. Similarly, when I is 3, we have to print 2, right? And lastly, when I is 4, we have to print 1. So what pattern can you see over here? Well, also the value of n in this case is 5, right? So if I come back over here and also note the value of n down, what you would notice? You'd notice that I plus whatever you have to print is equal to n. So 0 plus 5 is 5, 1 plus 4 is 5, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 2 is 5, and 4 plus 1 is 5, right? Which means each of this can be represented using n and I. So this can be written as n, which is 5, minus 0, which is I. And this one would be 5 minus 1. This one would be 5 minus 2. Similarly, 5 minus 3 and 5 minus 4. Now you can replace the 5 that we have over here with n, correct? So if you generalize this, you would get n over here. And you can replace this 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the value of I. So you can say n minus I, right? Which means when I is 0, you have to print n minus I. When I is 1, you have to print n minus I, which means for whichever value of I that is there currently, what you have to do is calculate n minus I and print it, right? So with this discussed, let us come back to IntelliJ. Let me quickly create a new Java class. Let's name this class as Q4. And here, let's have a PSVM, that is public static void main method. Now let's grab whatever we had in Q2. So let me copy this. Let's come back to Q4. Let's paste this over here. Now there we were printing I plus 1, but according to whatever we have discussed just now, what we have to print is n minus I. So if I make this change and I run the code, what do we get? Well, we get all 6 in the first line all the way up to all 1 in the last line. If I change this n from 6 to 5, we would get all 5 in the first line and all 1 in the last line, and total number of 5 lines, right? So with this, we have solved this question also. And the next question that we have is similar to whatever we had discussed over here. That is, instead of printing 5a in the first line, what are we doing is we are printing 5e in the first line, right? So let us quickly discuss this as well and then write the code for this. So this is what we have to print, right? And this is what we will have. So now let's talk about what will we print when the value of I is 0. So when I is 0, we have to print E, right? And to print E, what we will have to get is its ASCII. And the ASCII of E is 69. So that means when I is 0, we have to print 69. Then when I is 1, we'll have to print 68, right? Because that's what is the ASCII of D. So we will print 68. Then when I is 2, print 67, I is 3, print 66, I is 4, print 65. So now let me relate what the value of I is to what we have to print. So n is 5, which means I will go from 0 all the way up to 4. When I is 0, print 69. When I is 1, 68. Then when I is 2, print 67, then 66, and then 65. So if you take a look at this, you would notice that these two sums up to 69, right? So what we can do is when the value of I is 0, we can print 69 minus 0, right? So 69 minus 0 when the value of I is 0. Then when the value of I becomes 1, we can print 69 minus 1, which will give us 68. Similarly, value of I is 2, we'll print 67 and so on, right? So can we say that we have to print 69 minus I? We can, right? So this will help us in determining what to print for each value of I when the value of n is equal to 5. Now, if you're wondering why did I emphasize when the value of n is equal to 5 so much, it is because if the value of n changes from 5 to 6, I will go from 0 all the way up to 5, which means this will change. And this will change to this. The first one would be 70 because when n is equal to 6, we would have to print capital F, right? And the ASCII code for capital F is 70. Then for 1, it will be 69, then 68, then 67, then 66, 65. And this is how they would relate, right? And because this has changed, even this would change. Now this would become 70 minus I, correct? So when n is equal to 5, we are going for 69 minus I. When n is equal to 6, this will be 70 minus I. Similarly, when n is 7, this would become 71 minus I, and so on, right? So that means this is going to change on the basis of the value of n. So to figure what this expression would be, we will have to take into consideration what the value of n is, right? So let us focus on that. Now, we have seen that when n is 5, we are going for 69 minus I. So let me just write 69 over here. When n is 6, we are going for 70 minus I. Similarly, when n is 7, it will be 71 minus I, and so on. So let's try to understand, given the value of n, how will we be able to figure this out? So if n is 5, it is 69. Can I write this as 64 plus 5? We can, right? Now, if you're wondering, why did I go for 64 plus 5 and why not for example, 66 plus 3 or something like that? It is because we are trying to relate the value of n to whatever we have over here. So that is why I decomposed this into two numbers, which ultimately getting added and which will ultimately give us the same number. And one of these numbers to which this got decomposed is the value of n itself. So if I go the same way, we will get 64 plus 6 over here and 64 plus 7 over here. So now if you take a look at this and this, what you would notice is we're going for 64 plus whatever the value of n is, right? So we have n is 5, we're going for 64 plus 5. N is 6, we're going for 64 plus 6. And when n is 7, we're going for 64 plus 7, right? Which means that whatever we have in this expression, that is 69 minus I, this 69 itself is coming from 64 plus n. So can I write this one as 64 plus n minus I? We can, right? Similarly, this can also be written as 64 plus n minus I, correct? So once we have this figured out, we will be able to determine what to print for each of these rows, right? So with this knowledge, let us go back to IntelliJ and let's write the code for this. So this is the fifth question. So let's create a Java class. Let's say Q5. And let me close all of these other classes that we have. Let's have a main method over here. Now here, what are we going to do is take some value for n. Now we're going to iterate how many times? We're going to iterate for n number of times. And this is going to be a nested loop. So we'll say int j is equal to 0, j is less than n, j plus plus. Now what we have to do is, like what we did in Q3, we have to print some character, right? So let me copy this statement and paste it over here. Now, of course, we're not going to print I plus a. On the basis of whatever we had discussed, what we will have to print is, we will have to print this, which is 64 plus n minus I, right? So over here, let me get rid of I plus a, and instead let's put 64 plus n minus I. So if I do that, and I will need a println statement over here. And now if I run the code, what do we get? Well, we get 5e in the first line, then 5d in the second line, and so on all the way up to 5a in the last line. If I change this to 6, I should get 6f in the first line all the way up to 6a in the last line, which is what we are getting. Now, let me minimize this and let's focus our attention to this print statement. For that, let's come back here and let me clear all of this first. So we are performing this operation 64 plus n minus I. Now, the reason we are doing this is because what we need is, we need e, for example, when the value of n is 5 and the value of I is 0. Similarly, when the value of n is 5 and I is 1, we need d and so on, right? And since we are dealing with letters of the English alphabet, can we somehow change this to include the first character of the English alphabet like we did in question 3 over here, where we said I plus a? We can, right? So what if I use a? Now, if I use a is equal to 65, right? But what we need is, we need 64. So can I say a minus 1? We can. So if I do this, we will get 64. And then can I continue this way? Can I say a minus 1 plus n minus I? We can, right? So with this clear, let us come back to IntelliJ. And over here, let's change 64 to a, capital A, minus 1. And then let's run the code and see the output. And we are getting the same output for n is equal to 6. So with this, we are done with this question. Now, with that clear, let's move on to the next question. Over here, what are we doing is, we're printing from 1 to 5 in the first line, then from 6 to 10 in the second line, from 11 to 15 in the third line, and so on. And here as well, the value of n is 5. So let's understand how can we print this pattern. So this is the pattern that we are trying to print, right? And this is what we will have when we iterate from 0 to n in a nested loop, right? So like what we did in the last question and all the other questions before that, let us try to relate whatever we have for I and j with whatever we have to print. So in all of the questions before this, for each value of I, we were printing the same thing irrespective of the value of j, right? But over here, this looks a little different, right? So for the first line, we're printing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is, when I is 0, j is 0, we have to print 1. Then when I is 0, j is 1, what we have to do is print 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5. Then when I becomes 1 and j becomes 0, we have to print 6, and we will continue that way, right? So how can we solve this question? Well, if you take a look, what's happening over here is the iteration would go this way. First of all, we will reach here, then here, and so on, right? So in the first iteration, we'll print 1. In the second iteration, we will print 2. In the third iteration, we'll print 3. Fourth iteration, we will print 4. Fifth iteration, we will print 5. And this will be the sixth iteration, right? Of course, we would have moved to the next line, but then this would be the sixth iteration, because taking the value of n is equal to 5, we are going to iterate for n cross n, that is 25 times. So we are going to iterate for 25 times, and we have to print numbers from 1 all the way up to 25. So can we do this? Can we keep track of the count of the number of iterations that has happened so far, and can we print that count? What I mean is, when the loop starts, we are going to check the value of count that we would have tracked so far. So if the value of count is 8, we'll print 8, right? And we have printed 8, which means this is the 8th iteration, which means in the next iteration, the value of count would become 9. And since the value of count is 9, we will print 9. And then in the next iteration, the value of count would become 10, and then we will print 10, and so on. We can do that, right? So for this, let's go to IntelliJ and let me create a new Java class. Let me name this class as Q6. Let's have a main method here, and let's take the value of n as, for example, 5. And we'll have for int I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. Then we will have int j is equal to 0, j less than n, j plus plus. So what's going to happen is this is going to iterate for 25 times in total, right? And what we can do is we can keep track of the number of iterations that has happened. So let's do this. Let's say count is 0. Count is 0 because when the control reaches here, no iteration has happened, right? The first iteration would happen when this for loop begins to execute. And that is why let's keep count as 0. Now what we have to do is in the first iteration, we have to print 1, which means the first time this loop gets executed, we will first of all have to increase the value of count by 1 to keep track of the number of iterations that has happened. And then we will have to print the value of count, right? Again, in the first iteration, we'll have to print 1. Now, what are we doing is we are initializing count to 0. And the reason for that is count is equal to 0 over here would indicate that no iteration has taken place so far. Count should be changed to 1 only when the first iteration has taken place. And that is why over here inside the inner for loop, we are increasing the value of count by 1, right? Now, once we have increased the value of count to 1, we can print 1 over here. That is what we want to do, right? We want to print the current count of number of iterations. So that is why we are first of all going for count plus plus, and then we are printing the value of count. Now there's a few more things that we have to handle, which is we'll have to leave a space. And after the inner for loop ends, we'll have to shift the cursor to the next line. So with this done, if I run the code, what do we get? Well, okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in separate lines, and that's because I have used println over here. So if I change this and then run the code, I will get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the first line, then 6 to 10 in the second line, 11 to 15 in the third line, and so on, right? So this way we can print this pattern. But this is just one of the ways in which we can print this pattern. There's another way. Well, let's figure that out. So if we take a look at the value of I and what we are printing, we will see something. But before I do that, let me fill this row as well. So take a look. When the value of I is 0, we are printing from 1 to 5. So let me put that information over here. Value of I is 0. We are going to start from 1 and we are going to end at 5, right? When the value of I is 1, we are going to start from 6 and go all the way up to 10. So when the value of I is 1, start is 6, end is 10. When the value of I is 2, start will be 11 and end will be 15, right? For 3 and 4, it will be 16. That is, the start value will be 16, end will be 20. And for 4, start value will be 21, end will be 25. So now relate the value of I with the start value and with the end value. So before I do that, let me make some space over here so that it's easier for me to write. Now, if the value of I is 1, start is 1. If the value of I is, if the value of I is 0, start is 1. If the value of I is 1, start is 6. I2, start 11. I3, start 16. I4, start 21. End is this way. I is 0, end is 5. I is 1, end is 10. And 15, 20, 25. So this seems to be multiple of 5, right? So can I write it this way? Can I say that this is 5 multiplied with 1, this is 5 multiplied with 2, 5 multiplied with 3, with 4 and with 5? We can, right? Now, the first part of this multiplication, that is the first number, is constant. It is 5. But the second one is changing from 1 all the way up to 5. So if I relate the value of I, which is also changing in each of the iteration, like this value, what will we observe? We will observe that when I is 0, we are multiplying 5 with 0 plus 1, that is 1, right? So this 1 over here can be written as I plus 1. So when I is 0, we are multiplying with 1. When I is 1, we are multiplying with 1 plus 1, which is 2. I is 2, we are multiplying with 3, which is 2 plus 1. And this holds for all of these, right? So can I say that the end value is 5 multiplied with I plus 1? We can. So let me write the general formula over here. 5 multiplied with I plus 1. So with this figured out, let us now focus our attention to the value of I and let us relate it to the value of start. So when I is 0, start is 1. When I is 1, start is 6. I is 2, start is 11 and so on. So if you notice, you would see that if the value of end in previous iteration is 5, the value of start in the current iteration is 6, which is just 5 plus 1. The same thing holds for these two, that is 10 and 11. So the value of start in the current iteration is 11 and the value of end in the previous iteration is 10. This 11 is just 10 plus 1. The same thing holds for 15 and 16 and the same thing would hold for 20 and 21, right? So if we take this into consideration, what will be the value of start? Well, the value of end in the current iteration would be 5 multiplied with I plus 1, which means the value of end in the previous iteration would be 5 multiplied with I minus 1, right? This is I plus 1 in the current iteration. So in the previous iteration, it should be I minus 1, correct? That is why we'll say 5 multiplied with I minus 1. Now, this plus 1 would also come over here, right? Because in the current iteration, it is I plus 1. In the previous iteration, it will be I minus 1 plus 1, right? And what did we discuss was, if the value of end in previous iteration was 10, the value of start in the current iteration would be 10 plus 1. So to this, what we will have to do is, we will have to add 1. Now, if we simplify this one, what we will get is, we will get 5 multiplied with I minus 1 plus 1 would give us I, because minus 1 plus 1 will get cancelled. So we will have 5 multiplied by I plus 1, right? So ultimately what we got is this. We got 5 multiplied by I plus 1, which means that the value of start in any iteration would be 5 multiplied by I plus 1 and the value of end in any iteration would be 5 multiplied by I plus 1. you see the position of parenthesis is different in both of them, right? So let's see if this holds up for all values of I or not. So when the value of I is 0, this will be 0 plus 1, which is 1. So it holds true for the value of I 0. When the value of I is 1, it will be 5 multiplied by 1, which is 5 plus 1, which is 6. Holds true. Value of I is 2, this will be 10 plus 1, which is 11. Value of I is 3, this will be 15 plus 1, 16. Value of I is 4, this will be 20 plus 1, which is 21. So what that means is, given n is equal to 5, start will be 5 multiplied by I plus 1, n will be 5 multiplied by I plus 1. Now with this known, what we can do is, for each value of I, we can determine or calculate the start and the end value. And what we can do next is, we can print the values from start all the way up to end for each value of I, right? So let me go to IntelliJ and let's start writing the code for this. But before that, let me refactor this and let's rename this to Q6 solution 1. Now I'm going to create a new Java class. I'm going to say Q6 solution 2. And here I'm going to copy the main method from Q6 solution 1 and let's paste it over here in Q6 solution 2. Now there are a few changes that we will have to make, right? We won't need count anymore, which means we can get rid of the count plus plus and the system.out.print statement that is printing the value of count. Now what we need instead is, for each value of I, we need to calculate the start and the end value, right? So we can say int start is equal to, like we discussed, 5 multiplied by I. By the way, that 5 which we had discussed over here is coming from the fact that n is equal to 5. If the value of n changes to 6, this will become 6 multiplied by I plus 1. Let me quickly demonstrate that to you. So for that, let's take n is equal to 6, which means what are we going to have in the first line is 1 all the way up to 6, right? So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Second line will be, sorry, not 6, 7. It will be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there will be 4 more lines, but let's not get there. Now, on the basis of whatever we had discussed, I had said that start is equal to 5 multiplied by I plus 1 because n is equal to 5. So if the value of n changes to 6, this would become 6 multiplied by I plus 1. So let's come back over here and let's see if this holds. So I'm saying start will be 6 multiplied by I plus 1. So let's take a look. I is 0. So if I is 0, this will give us 1, correct? Which is the start value. Then when I is 1, this will give us 6 multiplied by 1, which is 6 plus 1, 7, which is the start value over here. When I becomes 2, this should be 13. And that is what we will get here, right? So the start value of 6 multiplied by I plus 1 is actually just n multiplied by I plus 1, right? And you can check the same thing for the expression that will give us the end value. That will become n multiplied by I plus 1. Essentially 6 multiplied by I plus 1 if the value of n is 6, right? So the start value can be written as n multiplied by I plus 1, where n multiplied by I is happening first. So we'll say n multiplied by I plus 1, and then we'll say int n is equal to n multiplied by I plus 1. So now, since we have the start and the end values, and if we take a look at what we have to print over here, we have to print the numbers between start and end, including start and end, right? So when I is equal to 0, we can calculate start and end, and then we have to print numbers from start all the way up to end. So when I is 0, start will be 1, end will be 5, we will print 1 to 5. Then when I is 1, we will get start as 6, end as 10, and we will print 6 to 10, and this would continue for all values of I, right? So with this discussed, what we need to do now is we need to iterate from start to end, and we have to print the current value, right? So instead of j going from 0 to n, what am I going to do here is I'm going to start the value of j from start and I'm going to go all the way up to n, right? That is why I'm saying j less than equal to n. And here I am going to say system.out.println j plus with a space. So if I run the code, I should get the same output that I got in solution 1, which is this. So let's go to Q6 solution 2. Let's run the code and see if we are getting the same output or not. So running the code gives us the same output, right? Which means solution 2 is also working absolutely fine. So question 6 is also done. Now the question 6 that we have over here is somewhat different from all the questions that we had solved earlier. Earlier, what used to happen was we were printing the exact same thing irrespective of the value of j, right? In the first question, whatever we printed didn't even depend on either the value of I or j. But the second question onwards up to the fifth question, the value that we are printing depends on the value of I at least. Now here, the value that we are printing is different. It depends on the value of I, but not solely on the value of I. There's an expression that is giving us the value that we are supposed to print, right? So with this clear, let's move on to the next question. And this question seems similar to the previous one, except that in the second line, we are printing 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, but not in the same order. We're printing it in the reversed order. So if you take a look at the question that we're going to attempt now and compare it with the question that we just solved, you would see that in the second line, in the previous question, we were printing 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Here we're printing 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6. Then the same thing applies into the fourth line. We're printing 20, 19, 18, 17, and 16. But over here, we were printing, that is in the previous question, we were printing 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, right? So what you can notice is when the value of I is 1, the order gets reversed. Then when the value of I is 3, the order gets reversed. So what does this tell you? This tells you that when the value of I is an odd number, the order is getting reversed, right? Because if you see when the value of I is 0 or 2 or 4, the order is the same as the last question, right? So what we will have to do is we will simply have to determine if the current value of I is an even number or an odd number. If the current value of I is an even number, we will print the values the same way as the last question. But if the current value of I is an odd number, what we will do is we will reverse the order in which we are printing. That is, instead of starting from start and going all the way up to end, we will start from end and go all the way up to start, right? So with this clear, let us create a new Java class. Let's name this class as Q7 and let us grab the solution 2 of Q6 and let us paste it over here. Now let me get rid of the extra spaces that we have. Okay, so what we have to do here is we have to determine the value of start and end, right? But before we run the inner loop, what we will have to do is we will have to determine if I is an even number or not. So that we will do with the help of this expression where we will divide I by 2 and check the remainder. If it is 0, it is even. If it is not 0, it is odd, right? So what do we know from this question? We don't have to do anything different if the value of I is an even number, right? So what are we going to do is we're going to grab this and we're going to put that inside the if block. Now, if the value of I is even, we have taken care of what to print and how to print. So let's also take care of the fact that when the value of I is not even, which means it is odd, we have to print but in reverse order. So let's grab that loop, paste it over here. And what are we going to do next is we're going to start from end, right? And we're going to go all the way up to start. And since we are starting from a bigger number and going all the way up to a smaller number, we will go for minus minus over here instead of plus plus. So with this done, if I run the code, this is what we have. We have 1 to 5 in the first line, which is what we expected to print, right? In the second line, we expected to print 10 to 6. So we've got 10 to 6. Third line, 11 to 15. Fourth line, 20 to 16, right? So third line, 11 to 15. Fourth line, 20 to 16. And the last one is 21 to 25, which is what we have over here, which means this code is working absolutely fine. So with this, the 7th question is done. Now I've got 7 more questions to discuss in this category. But if I do that in this video itself, the video will be very long. So what I'll do is I'll just wrap up over here and leave you with these 7 questions to take a look at and practice. And in the next video, which will just be the part 2 of this video, just a continuation of this video, we will solve the rest of the 7 questions. So with this, we come to the end of the video, and I hope you have learned something new and useful. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.